Hi, all. Welcome back to Uncommon Goods, episode 35, the pending CBDC disaster. It's hard to say. I'm back from an extended break from podcasting, and I've really missed doing this show. The threat of communism, socialism, wokeism attacking our freedoms and sovereignty, it hasn't slowed down. So I personally believe this show is needed more than ever, and the message will resonate. So, quick update about me and why I've taken a little bit of time off. About 6 months ago, I packed up, sold, gave away, and stored all my, as I say, all our possessions, including the microphone I usually record the show with. And we've been traveling across the U.S. I call it the based red state tour. I had to get out of California, especially out of the progressive pit that is San Francisco. I want to see what the rest of the country has to offer, and particularly the red states. By that I mean the Republican, were the more conservative leaning states, states that are a little bit more about freedom, and rather than imposing their control over you and taxing you heavily. So far, it's been great. Started out in Utah, then Arizona, which is not a red state, but they're very Second Amendment friendly. And then, especially compared to California, then Texas, San Antonio in particular for a month. Then New Mexico, again, not red leaning, but a little more freedom, a very working class state. Then Florida, which is red as all can be. And then now South Carolina, which I consider to be pretty red. And looking at the stats and the voting demographics here, very red. So both are staunchly red states, both Florida and South Carolina. Now, before I get into this too much, do I think Republicans are all great and they'll save America? Not really. At the best, right now, the way they're doing things only slow the demise and the destruction of our financial system, and American prosperity. They do spend a lot, just not as much as the Democrats. But both parties, are spending into an endless deficit, and very few have the backbone and the temerity to stand up to it, and they're usually laughed out as weird crackpots. So, but these red states that I've been in, they have a lot of aspects to them that I like. There's less homeless, there's more Second Amendment freedoms, there's a lower cost of living, there's a little bit of intolerance. Oh, intolerance, so bad. Well, they don't tolerate homeless people, they don't tolerate crime. So, those are all positive attributes, I believe. So, normally, I like to highlight like the threat of China, the evil of supporting Chinese made goods and the Americans that sell out America, American companies that sell out America, to produce and procure cheaper goods, that of course ends up costing more in the long term, environmentally, economically. The growth, you buy stuff made in China, doesn't support American made jobs as much as manufactured in the US. So, um, today I'm talking about like a Chinese made good that end up might making it over here and it won't be good. And it's not necessarily a physical good, it's more tangible or intangible. It's a concept, right? An idea that only a totalitarian regime would love. Anything that, a regime that wants to seek total and complete control over their citizens. And as much as America is the land of freedom, when it comes down to it, the elites, the political leaders, really, for the most part, especially on the federal level, and the state level, they really see us as pawns and pocketbooks that they can manipulate and control. They just see us as taxpayers that they can bleed dry. And while they continue to bleed us dry, they keep thinking of new and clever ways to cement their domination over us. And I see it now as I get older, my income goes up. They will do anything to prevent the individual citizen from increasing their own level of personal constitutionally protected freedoms and growth and sovereignty. As I get older and make more money, every time I hit a new tax bracket, they take more out. I'm about to pay my most amount of taxes in my life, and it's absolutely ridiculous. And just knowing it's going to go to the Ukraine and supporting those bums, really bums me out. So, and again, do you think I'm crazy that our elites and political leaders are, you know, all they care about is, asserting control over our lives. You think I'm exaggerating? You don't believe me? Well, where the hell were you between March of 2020 and today? There was a globally coordinated effort to destroy our economic and medical freedoms. And if that isn't obvious to you, I can't help you. Basically, it means that reality has no meaning to you. But today, what I want to talk about is in pretty much a vile and evil Chinese import or export. And it's not something that's produced in a factory. It's an idea, it's a concept, it's a system. I'm talking about CBDCs, Central Bank Digital Currencies. Again, that's CBDCs, not CBGBs, which is a legendary New York music venue that had famous bands such as the Ramones and Blondie and Talking Heads playing there in their heyday. Sadly, RIP CBGBs is no longer around. Again, Central Bank Digital Currencies. It's a long word, long acronym, CBDCs. And the more I hear about these CBDCs, the more worried I am about them eventually being rolled out to the US, any Western nation, and screw it to any nation in the world. So, CBDCs, what's wrong with them is they're really an attack in our ability to freely engage in commerce, to freely invest in your own future, to have complete control of your own finances. It's a tool for financial repression and infringement on your rights, and it's going to be used to control you. So, here are some of the main issues about a central bank digital currency that should concern you. One, it's issued by a central bank and it's totally controlled by them. So, meaning they can put it in your account and they can pull it back on a whim. They can control what you spend it on, where you spend it, and when. So, uh, one day the World Economic Forum says we have to eat like 25% of our protein for bugs. I mean, they are promoting bug protein, insect protein as a replacement for meat. So then, this is a hypothetical scenario, but could happen. You'll release a CBDC that you have to spend on food. You can't go out and buy a steak. No, the CBDC is going to be programmed to require you to spend it on the right products, forcing you to buy crickets instead of tri-tip. They'll tell you, hey, you can only eat 5 ounces of animal protein per week, because Greta Thunberg, who is a mentally ill idiot, says so. Right now she's the poster child for saving the world, but she can't even manage her own life. Again, so say you get the CBDC and they're going to make it very convenient. They're just going to plop it in your bank account or your special digital currency account. And say you don't want to spend it this week, right? You're not a big spender. You want to save it up and invest it, right? No, they're going to be able to tell you that, hey, you have to spend it within 30 days or you get less next time. And oh, you can't buy stocks or mutual funds or put it in an IRA, individual retirement account. It has to be used to buy goods that we tell you which goods to buy. So this is going to put you in a perpetual paycheck to paycheck cycle. They're forced you to spend instead of building up a buffer, right? And imagine you're allowed to save up money in your CBDC. You can save it up because you don't want to spend it, right? Well, they can take it away. They can just suck it right out from your account. Possibly because you said some politically incorrect thoughts. You might have voted the wrong way. You were seen at a protest, exercising your constitutionally protected rights, right? You took your kid out of public school and started homeschooling them. Whatever, you're seeing some sort of obstacle or enemy of the political elites or the central banks, they can take your money back if it's a CBDC. It's also known as kind of like a social credit score system that rewards and punishes people based on like arbitrary criteria. The social credit system is big in China. They use it there. And if you run afoul of the social credit system, if you want to fly somewhere within China, they force you to take the bus. This is true. There's this guy, he's like an MMA expert. He's not even that great of an MMA or champion. That's mixed martial arts. Think Ultimate Fighter Championship or UFC. He goes around and challenges like these old school kung fu martial artists that have like a mystical grip on their fans. Like think about those guys with the long beards and the hair, and people that engage in all these classical techniques. Well, this guy challenges them to a sparring session, And what he ends up doing is beating the crap out of him every time because he fights in an effective manner and takes away the mysticism of these kung fu masters. And guess what happened to him? He can no longer buy a plane ticket in China. He has to take a bus. So if there's something that takes like a 2 3 hour flight in China, it takes him like a week on a bus as he goes around trying to travel and engage in these demonstration sparring matches against these so-called kung fu masters. Basically, what he did with fighting these old kung fu masters, he kind of poked them in the eye, exposed them for what they were, complete frauds. So, sorry, went off on a tangent, um, but that's about like what the social credit score system is, and it can be enforced with a CBDC. It's a level of control they have over you. They can force you to step in line and not rock the boat. So the land of the free will turn into the land of the CBDCs. And unlike now, when you get paid, you can spend it on what you want, for good or bad. There's probably a lot of you out there who spend too much, and you punish yourself financially all on your own. But again, it's your freedom to do so. You also are free to save and invest, and you can break free the paycheck to paycheck cycle with our currency. And as bad as our fiat currency and Federal Reserve System is now, you have a lot more freedoms than you will if there ever is a CBDC. So just imagine your financial freedom stripped away, your freedom to invest, save, spend, loan, $1,000 to your mother, or borrow $1,000 from her, or just give your money away. All those freedoms can and will be stripped away with the CBDC. They're going to control you on the individual paycheck level. So I got pretty worked up thinking about it. I'm pretty angry, stressed, fearful, but I'm looking at ways to combat this eventual thing that's I'm pretty sure is going to show up here. So I came across this article, originally found it on zerohedge.com, which is kind of like an alternative news site. And it's originally published in a website called internationalman.com, which is kind of hokey, excuse me. But the article is How to Resist CBDCs, 5 Ways You Can Opt Out of This Dystopian Future by Nick Giambruno, again, on internationalman.com. And, internationalman.com sounds a little bit hokey, but their mission is, quote, bringing you the best information on making the most of your personal freedom and financial opportunity around the world, end quote. So you can imagine what it's really about. It's, getting multiple passports, diversifying your investments, developing more of an international presence so you can freely go about and not be really forced to tie down to one area. So Nick Giambruno, in this article, he outlines the threats of CBDCs, such as, quote, they allow governments to track and control every penny you earn, save, and spend. They are a powerful tool for politicians to confiscate and redistribute wealth as they see fit, and enable devious social engineering by allowing governments to punish and reward people in ways they previously couldn't. Suppose governments impose lockdowns again for flu season, so-called climate change, or whatever pretext they find convenient. CBDCs could be programmed to only work in a geographic area. For example, your payments could be denied if you travel more than a mile from your home during a lockdown, end quote. So that one, that localized control really freaks me out. And Australia would love that during the so-called pandemic. If you visited Western Australia, even if you were vaccinated, you had to quarantine yourself for 2 weeks, and they would text you, and within 15 minutes, you had to take a picture, a selfie, and send it to them, and they could geolocate you, make sure you weren't outside of quarantine. And that was for vaccinated people. I had a friend with a dying stepfather they couldn't see for 2 weeks while they were trying to visit. So Australia was an awesome country, but now it's gone fairly totalitarian. Another statement that Nick Giambruno made in this article: CBDCs are without a doubt an instrument of enslavement. They represent a quantum leap backward in human freedom, end quote. And, enslavement's a strong term, but when they have you by the pocketbook, that severely limits your freedoms. What else can you do? You can't go anywhere. You can't spend it. You drive more than 10 miles to go sightseeing, and they won't let you do it again. So I agree, CBDCs will be used to limit our freedoms. So what will we do once our country tries to roll out a CBDC? I got a few thoughts on how it will occur. It's probably going to start out as like a limited trial, made to seem exclusive, only open to a few people, right? That'll make it seem scarce and it'll breed desire, right? But this isn't Gmail, right? You might not remember, but when Gmail first rolled out, gosh, in the early 2000s, it was by invite only, and you were kind of cool if you got an invite. And just so you know, I got an invite back in the day, so I'm pretty cool. So again, when a CBDC is offered, you're a lucky invitee, an exclusive, test run to try it out. Decline and tell them to get F'd, right? The fewer people testing it out, trying, giving it some sort of credibility, just don't do it. And isn't it convenient, after the last 3 years, this, fake pandemic, retail cash transactions have decreased. They've really pushed credit card and touchscreen payments. You go to the coffee shop every time, boom, they flip that screen over and you got to touch it with your hands. So, they got rid of cash because it was dangerous. It was, everybody touching cash. But supposedly it's a lot safer to touch that screen that 10 million of the people touched before you, right? So, yeah, it's more dangerous than handing over $20 bill to buy some eggs at the store. So, this article goes over 5 ways to resist and fight back against CBDCs. And, let's go over them. But in the wise words of Ron Paul, right? What none of them, politicians, will admit is that the market is more powerful than central banks and all the economic planners put together. Although it may take time, the market always wins. It's very true. I'm going to touch on this a little bit later. So, step one on the 5 ways to fight this coming dystopian disaster of CBDCs. Step one, use physical gold and silver. Now, this is one that I'm not really experienced in. And, buy gold and silver at your own risk. I haven't really done much of it other than buying a few silver coins. The idea behind this is to use alternative forms of money. And what is money? Ultimately, money throughout history was an object or record accepted as payment. And money was not always issued by the government, right? You would, make gold coins. You would collect conch shells. The Native Americans here in the U.S. did that until the settlers, or I guess the colonizers, figured that out, and they just devised ways to harvest as many conch shells as possible. And then that was possibly America's first hyperinflation. There was too much currency in there and too few goods. So again, money was not always issued by the government, but it was a thing that people agreed on to use as a form of exchange of value. So, quote from the article: people have used stones, glass beads, salt, cattle, seashells, gold, silver, and other commodities as money at different times. However, for over 2,500 years, gold has been mankind's most enduring form of money. Gold is durable, divisible, consistent, convenient, scarce, and most importantly, scarce. And most importantly, the hardest of all physical commodities. In other words, gold is hard to produce relative to existing stockpiles and is the one physical commodity most resistant to inflation of its supply. That's what gives gold its monetary properties. End quote. And again, I'm not a huge gold guy, and I'm reluctant to tell somebody to go, you know, cash out your life savings and buy a bunch of gold. It's not easy to go around, hey, I'll give you some gold for that car. So the idea, the article recommends gold for long-term savings and large transactions. They say the best way to do that is widely recognized gold bullion coins like the Canadian gold maple leaf or the American gold eagle, and then to use silver coins for smaller transactions. And again, with any financial transaction, the other party has to agree to accept your form of currency. So if someone offered me a couple gold coins for my car, I'm not really sure if I'd accept it. So, Hedge your bets with some gold if you want to. Again, this is not financial advice for me. I'm discussing this article, but it's worth a look. So take a stab and see if it's something you want to do. Now, step number two, to resist the impending threat of CBDCs is obtain financial sovereignty with Bitcoin. Yes, Bitcoin. And Bitcoin, has been in the news lately by proxy due to the slate of those, cryptocurrency exchanges going under. For example, BlockFi, Celsius, and others, right? And in turn, people were not able to access their Bitcoin that was stored on those exchanges. It's all in limbo because they're bankrupt or they lent them out or they commingled the funds. It's really unfortunate because any Bitcoin that you buy, you should really store it in your own private hardware wallet controlled by no one else than you. No central banks, only you. So these exchanges were like they were poorly managed companies and they promised ridiculously high returns. If you keep your Bitcoin with us, we'll give you like 8% annual percentage yield. Those are ridiculous, like Bernie Madoff numbers. And I kind of dabble with that a little bit. Thankfully, I pulled out before, the whole system collapsed. Again, this is not financial advice. It's for, informational or entertainment purposes only. Bitcoin lately is risky and volatile, but again, so is the US dollar. And one thing, unlike the US dollar, Bitcoin cannot be increased in supply. There will only ever be 21 million total Bitcoin. And the other thing about Bitcoin is divisible to, I think, like the millionth or something like that. So you could buy 0.00000001 of a Bitcoin and you could stack that. Those are called Satoshis, but I'm getting off in a tangent here. So why Bitcoin? The article states, quote, CBDCs and Bitcoin share some characteristics. For example, they're both digital and facilitate fast payments from a mobile phone, end quote. But it ends there, right? Here's where it's different about Bitcoin and CBDCs. Bitcoin is totally decentralized. There isn't one person or the Federal Reserve making decisions, increasing the supply, limiting who gets it, right? It's totally decentralized. CBDCs, again, are managed by a central bank. That means you get some, guy who hasn't lived like a normal person, gone to the store, shop groceries, right? They probably goes to work in a limo every day, has a security detail, has no idea what it's like for a regular working person. They make the decisions, right? And then Bitcoin has no gatekeepers, right? There's no one saying, hey, you can't buy or use Bitcoin. There's a certain demographic that's more interested in Bitcoin, mostly like nerdy programmer engineer types and stuff. But Bitcoin has no gatekeepers. You can buy it, you can sell it, you can exchange it with anyone else that wants to receive it. You can receive it from anybody else. It's totally decentralized, and there's multiple ways to send and receive Bitcoin. With CBDCs, you're totally at their mercy. The accounts can be frozen. It's impossible to do that with Bitcoin. Now, you might have remembered from those trucker convoy protests in Canada, people were donating Bitcoin, but those were being sent through via exchanges, and therefore the government would issue subpoenas and freeze those accounts. Now you got to do it through different ways and hardware wallets and such. So again, with CBDCs, the central bank has knowledge of where you spent your money. With Bitcoin, you can manage a very high level of privacy and full autonomy. It takes a few extra steps. That's the allure and the seduction of CBDCs. They're going to make it really easy for you. That doesn't mean it's good. Like the credit cards companies, they make it easy for you to spend a lot of money, but you might not actually be able to pay it back. So be careful for something that's very easy. Again, you can manage a very good level of privacy and full autonomy. A little extra work, but it's worth it. It's not as easy as PayPal or Venmo, but unlike PayPal, Bitcoin can't cancel your account or stop you from sending or receiving money. PayPal has been known to cancel people's accounts. If you want to learn a little bit more about Bitcoin, a great book I've read by a gentleman named Jason Williams. It's at Going Parabolic on Twitter. But his book is pretty cool. It's called Bitcoin, Hard Money You Can't F With, Why Bitcoin Will Be the Next global reserve currency. Put a link to it in the show notes. It's free to read on Kindle at this time. But again, you've got a link for it in the show notes. You can also buy a paperback copy or hardback. And if you're going to buy Bitcoin, you know, don't go to these exchanges that, they hold your Bitcoin for you. I recommend Swan Bitcoin. And again, this is not advice, but if you're going to do it through Swan Bitcoin. I've included a link. It's a referral link, so I get like $10. I think you get $10 of Bitcoin if you start buying on a regular basis. And that's what I do. I buy Bitcoin a little bit every week, so I'm not really necessarily banking my paycheck on it. Again, it's not an exchange. They're not commingling your Bitcoin with other funds, sending it to FTX with that weird Sam Bankman-Fried guy. They're not promising any return, interest or any percentage yield, anything like that. What they want you to do is to buy it through them and then take it off their, custody and put it in your own hardware wallet. So if you want to do that, just go to swanbitcoin.com. Swan as in like the bird. Swanbitcoin.com/Lars. You'll get like $10 in Bitcoin when you join. And speaking of hardware wallets, there's a bunch out there. I'll recommend the one I use. It's called a Ledger Nano. And just go to ledger.com to buy your own wallet so you can self-custody. It's the only way to secure Bitcoin. I'm not affiliated with Ledger in any way. There's plenty of other wallets out there. And only buy direct from the source. Don't buy from an intermediary. You might have heard this before. Not your keys, not your Bitcoin. What that means, if it's not in your possession of your keys, it's not really your Bitcoin. Ask anyone that kept their Bitcoin on the FTX exchange, run by that weirdo Sam Bank Fleischman or whatever he's called, or people on BlockFi or Celsius. I mean, all those are disasters. So enough about Bitcoin. Again, if you do buy it, buy at your own risk. Don't, put baby's college fund in there, but it's definitely a hedge. It's decentralized and completely free from any sort of central government control. So finally, next, the third way to resist CBDCs. It gets a little harder. Each step gets a little more difficult to do. Easy to buy gold, easy to buy Bitcoin. The third way to resist the dystopian threat of CBDCs is to get organized locally. Okay, I know that sounds a little something that old galaxy brain and communist AOC would say, but it makes sense, and you should really start doing it now. Several ways to get organized locally is to learn where you buy food and goods from local sources. Because one day, the CBDCs are rolled out, and your kid in kindergarten said, boys have a penis, girls have a vagina, and you got canceled. It's gonna be good to have relationships with local ranchers and farmers, right? So you could buy food direct from them outside of the central, payment system of the CBDCs. Just make friends with them, be customers with them. I highly recommend that. So this is one of those things that's going to take a while. So start small, start buying eggs from a local rancher. Look for places where you can buy a side of beef directly from the rancher, where you write them a check. Here you go. Here's a check for $600 and you get meat to last you a year and a half. It's great. And then the fourth one, step number 4 of beating back the dystopian future of CBDCs, exchange value for value. Also known as bartering, exchanging a services or good for another service or good. Removing money or cash from the exchange. Think about it this way: can you support yourself by offering services and getting paid in goods? For me, I had to think a little bit. I work in tech. I'm in sales. I'd really have to figure out what kind of service would the local rancher want in exchange for a side of beef, because I've been canceled. I might have said something against the mainstream narrative, and I got censored financially. What could I do for the local rancher or farmer in exchange for food that he makes, something that's of value to him, right? I don't know, maybe he can teach me how to ride a tractor and do some sort of farm work or something, or maybe I could do sales or volunteer or something. But anything in this hypothetical scenario to get me enough food to survive the winter after I'm canceled by the Federal Reserve. I know this sounds a little bit like crazy talk, but it's one of those things where it's better to start now than to wait until you've been canceled. It requires a little bit more creativity and digging deep to cultivate, willing trade partners and to really learn a little bit more about what you can offer in exchange for products or other services that will help you once you've been canceled. Now, the fifth and final way this article suggests how to resist the dystopian future of CBDCs is become a prepper. Excuse me. Now, the term prepper, I'm sure you might be listening going, wow, really? Do I need to buy gas masks and, build a bunker and load up with guns? Well, hey, it's not a bad idea, right? Better to have that than, not need it than need it and not have it. But again, yeah, like I said, the term preppers, it's loaded with a lot of preconceived notions about those weird paranoid people. They got the bunkers, gas masks out there, and they're out there, especially on those like doomsday prepper shows, because that's what sells for entertainment, right? The weirdos, the extremists. Think about like a prepper, an average prepper with like a homestead, some of their own livestock. Maybe they got a few goats, chickens, etc., home garden, and a year's supply of food in the cellar. That doesn't really draw the ratings as much as some doomsday prepper with 1,000 gas masks and 100,000 rounds of ammo. And again, that final step, become a prepper, is the hardest one, right? And each step in this article, each one gets a little bit more tricky, and it is the hardest. And the article's advice, though, is limited to very little. Quote: become as self-sufficient in as many areas as possible. This includes stockpiling supplies and gaining survival knowledge and skills. End quote. So again, becoming a prepper is great advice in general. I believe CBDCs are not only a threat, are not the only threat, but like economic stability, increased crime, disruptions to our food supply, natural disasters, man-made disasters such as the chemical spill in East Palestine, hyperinflation, which is coming soon, the way our government's spending and sending money to the Ukraine. I got my issues with that. Those are all reasons to like stockpile some water, food, and work on creating a system where your food is independent from the mainstream food supply. Again, this is like the hardest step, and really the first step you should really take is to start with a week's worth of food, and store that, then a month, then maybe 6 months. So I'm wondering, with these 5 steps, what do you think? Do you think a CBDC is coming to the U.S. or your country? I've got some international listeners, in Europe and stuff. What do you think? Is that going to come? I know in other European countries, they're really pushing a cashless society. And so this is my concern, right? Because CBDC is already a bad idea. The people are not going to like it. Only the govern me harder daddy types are going to like it. But the problem is, no matter how much of a bad idea it is, central governments, being what they are, they will double down on it. Once it's met with the resistance, they're going to try harder and it keeps squeezing until you give up, right? And you don't believe me? I mean, just think about every government initiative that hasn't worked. They just keep trying. In California, they're trying to build high-speed rail. It's already ridiculously over budget. And yeah, I remember talking about it 15 years ago. Hey, this is never going to happen. The budget's like quintupled since then, if I remember correctly. But let's talk about CBDCs and what they've tried to do elsewhere. Let's take a look at what's happening in Nigeria. So Nigeria introduced a CBDC called the Naira or Naira back in October of 2021, over a year ago. And as of now, only 0.5% of the population is using it. Yes, 0.5, half a percent. On the other hand, over 50% of the Nigerians are using cryptocurrency. Imagine that. A free market currency, digital, is preferred over the local government issued CBDC. So what does the government do? Did they go, oh, hey, let's invest in this other cryptocurrencies and make it easier for them? No. The government doubled down and started punishing their own citizens. Now, Nigeria is like a heavy Like they use a lot of cash, right? Way more than America, my understanding. A very cash society. A lot of people are poor. They're not in the banking system. So what they started doing is they started limiting cash ATM withdrawals to 225 a week. Can you imagine that? That's one of those run on the bank scenarios where they keep it, they keep you from taking all the money out and breaking the bank. And then it gets worse, right? From a Cato Institute article titled Nigeria restricts cash to punish, or excuse me, Nigeria restricts cash to push central bank digital currency. Quote, Nigerians can expect those restrictions to increase over time. In a statement, Central Bank Governor Godwin Emefiele said, the destination, as far as I'm concerned, is to achieve a 100% cashless economy in Nigeria. End quote. So I'm going to add a sixth way to fight CBDCs. Use cash as much as possible. Support small businesses that still accept cash. They probably want cash as a small business. Those the the fee, the merchant fee on those credit card payment terminals is ridiculous, right? Sometimes I go to a store and they go, hey, we'll charge you like $1 less if you pay cash for XYZ goods. Or they say, hey, cash preferred, on a handwritten sign. So they probably want cash, encourage it. If there's a cash only establishment, usually those are dive bars, support them, right? You're doing a good thing. Go to that bar that only takes cash and give it to them, and then, what I do, even if I'm stuck paying with a credit card somewhere and I'm giving a gratuity, I give the guy my tip in cash and I say, be sure not to declare that on your taxes. Why? Because it's between him and me. It's a gift. It's not, I'm not paying him. So, okay. Um, so yes, a sixth way to fight CBDCs is to use cash. Sorry, I'm going off on a tangent here. And when they want a 100% cashless economy, like in Nigeria, that is the blueprint, the framework, the structure for financial and economic censorship and control over your personal and business lives. And the article ends with this quote: as governments continue to weigh the costs and benefits of CBDCs, they should be mindful that if a product or service has to be forced on citizens, it's probably not a product or service that should be offered at all. End quote. So again, CBDCs are very common. Anything that is centrally controlled, telling you when, where, how, and what you can spend it on are absolutely commie. Cash, economic freedom are very uncommie. Having financial sovereignty, being able to invest, purchase what you want, give money to who you want, receive money from whoever wants to pay you, as long as you're not breaking the law, should not be infringed upon. Hey, I just wanted to also highlight a couple. I don't have I'm not sponsored by these people, but the uncommon good of the week. This episode, my favorite, website these days for buying American made is Origin Main. Go to originmain.com. I've mentioned them before. It's a website. They make and sell clothing, nutritional supplements, and exercise equipment. It's pretty kick-ass, and everything's very high quality. You can get shoes made from bison leather, get high quality like martial arts gis. Those are like the karate uniforms, for lack of a better term, and high quality jeans. I just bought a pair of joggers, fancy talk for sweatpants, and I buy their nutritional supplements, their protein powder called Jocko Milk. So great stuff. Go to originmain.com. I've got a referral link on the show notes. I think you save a little money if you buy from them. And again, thank you for listening to Uncommon Goods, episode 35. If you're watching on YouTube, give it a thumbs up, like, subscribe. If you're listening on a podcast app, give it a 5-star rating. I think the best one to do that is on Apple Podcast. Put on notes why you like it. Again, I'm glad to be back here on Uncommon Goods. Took a little hiatus. I really missed talking about, freedom, not buying Chinese-made goods. Again, CBDCs is definitely a Chinese-made or inspired good. So again, thanks again for listening, watching. I'll see you next time. Thank you.